My daughter stole every cent from our accounts and ran away with a criminal, leaving me empty-handed after 42 years of work. I was boiling with rage, but my 5-year-old grandson just smiled. "Grandpa, don't worry. I've taken care of everything." A few days later, she called, screaming and raging. "You won't believe what my clever grandson did." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I inserted my card into the ATM slot, like I had done thousands of times before. The screen flickered to life, asking for my PIN. 4 digits I'd memorized 20 years ago rolled off my fingertips without conscious thought. Insufficient funds. My hand froze on the keypad. The screen stared back at me with those 2 impossible words. I pulled the card out and examined it, checking the magnetic strip for scratches. Maybe the machine was broken. Had to be. I slid it back in. Same PIN, same request for withdrawal amount, same crushing response. This can't be right. The words escaped before I could stop them. An elderly woman behind me shifted impatiently, her keys jingling against her purse. I checked my wallet again, counting the 20 seconds I'd withdrawn last week. $40 left from grocery shopping. The savings account. That had to work. Different card, same machine, same PIN. My fingers trembled as I entered the numbers. Insufficient funds. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool April breeze. I had checked the balance just last week. $12,847. My entire nest egg saved from 42 years at the Ford plant. Every overtime shift, every skipped lunch, every careful dollar tucked away for retirement. The woman cleared her throat behind me. "Sorry," I mumbled, gathering my cards. The machine spit out a receipt. Account balance $0 and 0. Last transaction 9:23 a.m. This morning, my legs felt unsteady as I walked toward the bank entrance. The glass doors reflected an old man in faded jeans and a flannel shirt. Someone who looked confused and small. Inside, the familiar smell of carpet cleaner and coffee filled my nostrils. Janet Morrison stood behind the teller window, the same woman who'd handled my deposits for 15 years. "Afternoon, Mr. Williamson," she said with her usual smile. "How can I help you today?" "Janet, there's something wrong with my account." I placed both cards on the counter. "The ATM says I have no money, but that's impossible." Her fingers danced across the keyboard. The smile faded from her face. "Let me pull up your account history." More typing. A pause. "Mr. Williamson, I see a withdrawal this morning at 9:23 a.m. for the full balance of $12,847. The room tilted slightly. "That's not possible. I was at home sleeping at 9:30. The transaction shows it was made by Vera Hayes. She's listed as a joint account holder." Janet's voice grew softer. "She withdrew everything, sir. Both checking and savings." "Vera." My daughter's name hit me like a physical blow, but she wouldn't. There must be some mistake. Janet turned her monitor toward me. There it was, in black and white. Verna Hayes. Full withdrawal. Every penny I had in the world, gone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williamson. The transaction appears legitimate." She had the proper authorization. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred together. Joint account holder. I'd added her name 3 years ago when she was going through her divorce, just in case something happened to me. Just in case she needed help with little Micah. My hands shook as I gathered the cards from the counter. "Thank you, Janet." "Williamson, are you all right? Do you need me to call someone?" I shook my head and walked toward the exit on unsteady legs. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed too bright. My old Ford pickup sat in the parking lot where I'd left it, but everything else had changed. The whole world had shifted while I stood at that machine. I pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket and scrolled to Vera's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. There had to be an explanation. Some emergency with Micah. Some mistake. My daughter wouldn't steal from me, would she? The phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Her voice sounded cheerful and distant. Hi, you've reached Vera. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you. I hung up and tried again immediately. 5 rings. Voicemail. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I sat in the back parking lot. Cars passed by on Main Street. Normal people living normal lives while mine crumbled around me. I tried her number a 3rd time. Ring, ring, ring. Pick up Vera, please. 4th attempt. 5th. On the 6th try, she answered, Dad, I know why you're calling. Her voice was different. Cold. Prepared. No surprise, no concern, just resignation. Vera, honey, what happened with the money? Janet at the bank said you withdrew everything this morning, but that can't be right. Silence stretched between us. I could hear road noise in the background, the hum of highway travel. It's exactly right. Each word dropped like a stone. I took it all. Titus and I are starting fresh somewhere new. The phone felt slippery in my sweating palm. But sweetheart, that's everything I have. My whole retirement. How am I supposed to live? You'll figure it out. You always do. Vera, please. If you're in some kind of trouble, we can talk about this. Come home. Bring Micah. We'll work it out together. A harsh laugh crackled through the speaker. There's nothing to work out, Dad. I deserve this money more than you do. I've been taking care of everyone else my whole life. Now it's my turn. What about Micah? What about school? His friends? He'll adjust. Kids are resilient. My grandson, sweet, brilliant Micah, with his chess tournaments and science, fair projects, torn away from everything he knew. Vera, you can't do this. That boy needs stability. He needs his home, his school. What he needs is a mother who's happy for once. Someone who isn't stuck in this dead-end town, working dead-end jobs, scraping by while other people live real lives. I gave you everything I could. When you divorced Jimmy, who helped with the lawyer fees? When you couldn't make rent? When Micah needed school supplies, new clothes, birthday presents, who provided all that? And I'm grateful. This is me paying you back, by taking what I need to build a better life. The logic made no sense. I pressed my free hand against my temple, trying to understand. Sweetheart, please come home. We can talk this through. If you need money for something specific, we can arrange. There's nothing to arrange. Titus and I are already 3 states away. Don't try to find us. The line went dead. I called back immediately. Straight to voicemail again. Same result. The 3rd attempt gave me a message. The number you have dialed is not in service. She'd blocked me. I sat in the truck, staring at the phone screen. My daughter had just stolen my life savings and disappeared with my grandson. No warning, no discussion, no chance to say goodbye to the boy I'd helped raise for 15 years. The parking lot seemed to spin around me. I gripped the door handle, fighting a wave of nausea. 42 years of careful saving, gone in a single morning transaction. The woman I'd held as a baby, taught to ride a bicycle, walked down the aisle at her wedding, had just destroyed me without hesitation. The old Ford's engine coughed to life, familiar and reliable. At least something still worked the way it should. Pulling onto Main Street, I drove slowly past the hardware store, the diner, the small shops that had anchored my life for decades. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a stranger in my own town. The man who'd parked at the bank an hour ago no longer existed. I needed time to think before going home. Time to process what had just happened. Time to figure out how to survive with $40 to my name. I drove through the residential streets without conscious direction, letting muscle memory guide me past familiar landmarks. The elementary school, where I'd picked up Vera every day for 6 years. Mrs. Patterson's classroom, 3rd grade, where my little girl had won the spelling bee. I'd been so proud sitting in those tiny plastic chairs during the award ceremony. The ice cream shop on Elm Street, where we'd celebrated her 10th birthday, just the two of us, since her mother had already started pulling away by then. Vera had ordered a banana split bigger than her head and declared it the best birthday ever, Daddy. My throat tightened as I turned into Riverside Park, the same park where everything had been simple once, where being a good father meant pushing swings and catching fireflies, not navigating joint bank accounts and betrayal. I parked near the pond and walked to our old bench, the one facing the duck families that gathered each spring. Vera used to bring stale bread in a paper bag, carefully tearing it into perfect pieces. Not too big, Daddy. The little ducks can't eat big chunks. She'd been 3 years old, maybe 4. Standing on her tiptoes to reach over the fence, her small hand had slipped into mine with complete trust. I love you best of anyone, Daddy. Those words echoed across 28 years as I sat alone on the worn wooden bench. The ducks paddled near the shore, but no little girl stood beside me now. No patient father explaining which ducks were males and which were females. I remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle right here in this park. She'd been 7, determined but frightened, insisting I hold the seat while she pedaled. Around and around the path we'd gone. Her training wheels removed that morning, against her mother's wishes. Don't let go, Daddy. Promise you won't let go. But I had let go eventually. Watched her wobble and find her balance and ride away from me with pure joy on her face. She'd circled back, breathless with excitement. Did you see me, Daddy? Did you see me ride all by myself? When had that joyful little girl become the cold voice on the phone? When had I love you best of anyone, Daddy, transformed into, I took it all? High school graduation came back in fragments. Vera in her blue cap and gown, giving the valedictorian speech to a gym full of proud parents. I'd sat in the front row beaming while she spoke about dreams and possibilities, and the future stretching bright ahead of her. My father taught me that hard work and dedication can overcome any obstacle, she'd said that night. The entire audience had turned to smile at me. The single dad who'd raised such an accomplished daughter. What obstacles was she overcoming now by stealing my retirement? Her wedding day surfaced next, unbidden and sharp. The father-daughter dance at the VFW hall, her white dress spinning as I guided her around the small floor. Paul had been a good man then, before the drinking started, before the arguments that Micah overhead through thin apartment walls. Thanks for always being there, Dad, she'd whispered in my ear that night. I don't know what I would have done without you. I'd held her close and promised I always would be there through marriage troubles and money problems and raising a grandson who needed stability through everything, until this morning, when always being there meant having my loyalty rewarded with complete financial devastation. The spring breeze carried the scent of new grass and possibility. But all I felt was the weight of memory crashing against present reality. Every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift I'd worked, every careful dollar I'd saved, all of it justified by love. For a daughter who had just proven that love meant nothing to her, where did that little girl go, the one who'd clutched my hand and declared me the best daddy in the world? When did she learn to lie with such practiced ease? To plan betrayal while looking me in the eye and asking for help with rent money? I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and stood up from the bench. The ducks continued their eternal paddling, unbothered by human heartbreak. Some things remained constant. At least, something still made sense. Walking back to the truck, I caught sight of myself in the side mirror. Same flannel shirt, same worn face, but something fundamental had shifted. The man looking back at me was learning that love could be weaponized by the people who mattered most. I drove slowly toward home, dreading what awaited me. Micah's backpack would still be hanging by the front door from yesterday, his chest set spread across the kitchen table where we'd been working through a difficult endgame. All the evidence of a life I'd thought was secure and meaningful. My key hesitated at the front door lock. How do you enter your own home when everything you believed about your family has just been destroyed? How do you face a grandson who doesn't yet know his mother has abandoned him? The key turned, and I stepped into what remained of my normal life. Inside, the house felt exactly the same and completely different. I hung my jacket on the wooden peg by the door, the same peg I'd used for 23 years. The living room stretched before me, filled with furniture that had witnessed decades of family moments, now suddenly hollow with new meaning. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece like evidence in a trial I was just beginning to understand. I walked toward them slowly, drawn by faces that smiled back at me from happier times. The largest frame held Vera's wedding photo from 13 years ago, her radiant in white lace, me in my only good suit, both of us believing in futures that would never come to pass. I lifted the frame with trembling hands. Paul Hayes had seemed like such a catch back then. College-educated, steady job at the insurance company, polite and respectful during our first meeting. I'd walked my daughter down the aisle at St. Matthew's Church, proud to be giving her to a man who promised to love and protect her. That's how long their marriage lasted before the cracks started showing. I settled into my worn leather armchair, the one positioned perfectly for watching television and keeping an eye on the front door. The wedding photo remained heavy in my hands as memories flooded back with painful clarity. The first sign had been subtle. Paul's comments about Vera's cooking during Sunday dinners. "Honey, the chicken's a little dry. Maybe next time you could," always delivered with a smile, always followed by laughter. But I'd seen the way my daughter's face tightened with each gentle criticism. Then came the financial control. Vera had to ask permission for every purchase, justify every grocery receipt, explain every dollar spent. I'd watched my confident, valedictorian daughter gradually shrink into someone who apologized for buying Micah new shoes when his old ones wore through. But the morning that changed everything was burned into my memory with perfect clarity. October 15th, 2022, a Tuesday. I'd been reading the newspaper over coffee when my front doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Vera stood on my porch in yesterday's clothes, her left eye swollen shut and purple. 3-year-old Micah, clinging to her leg, with the terrified silence that children adopt when their world turns dangerous. "Dad." Paul hit me again. "Please. Can Micah and I stay here again?" The word had sliced through me like a blade. How many times had there been a again that I'd never known about? "Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome home." I'd said it without hesitation, without questions, without any conditions or expectations. Just open my arms and my home and my heart to shelter them from the storm of Paul's violence. That's what I did always. Every time Verna needed rescuing, I rescued her. Every time she needed money, I provided it. Every time she made a mistake, I fixed it. Every time she asked for help, I said yes. When Paul cleaned out their joint checking account before she could file for divorce, I hired the lawyer. When she couldn't make first month's rent on her apartment, I covered it. When Micah needed school clothes and sports equipment and birthday parties, I supplied everything without complaint. I loved being needed, loved being the reliable father who could solve any problem, meet any crisis, provide any missing piece. Being Vera's safe harbor gave my retirement purpose and meaning. But somewhere in all that unconditional giving, I'd taught her that taking from me carried no consequences, that my resources were hers by right rather than gift, that my love meant she never had to be responsible for her own choices. I stared at the wedding photo, studying Paul's confident smile. He'd been a taker, too, in his own way. The difference was that his taking came with violence and threats, while mine came with hugs and reassurance. But both of us had taught Vera that she didn't need to be accountable for her actions. The sound of video game music drifted down from upstairs. Micah in his room, unaware that his mother had stolen his grandfather's entire life, savings, and disappeared. Unaware that the foundation of his secure, stable world had just been shattered. I set the wedding photo back on the mantelpiece and picked up the next frame. Christmas morning, 2023. Vera, Micah, and me around the tree, surrounded by presents I'd bought and paid for. All of us smiling, all of us happy, none of us knowing that in 4 months everything would fall apart. When had I love you, Dad, become I deserve this money more than you do? When had my daughter learned that love was something she could exploit rather than something she should cherish? The answer sat heavy in my chest like a stone I'd taught her. Every rescue, every bailout, every unconditional yes had been a lesson in entitlement. Every time I'd smoothed over her mistakes, I'd prevented her from learning that actions have consequences. I'd enabled her, created the monster that had just destroyed me. Footsteps moved across the floor upstairs. Micah getting up from his gaming chair. In a few minutes, he'd come down for dinner, expecting the normal Tuesday evening routine we'd maintained for 3 years. Homework at the kitchen table, while I cooked. Chess games, after dinner, television, before bedtime. How do you tell a 15-year-old boy that his mother has abandoned him? That the woman who was supposed to protect him had instead chosen a criminal over her own son's stability and security? I stood up from the chair, knowing I couldn't avoid this conversation much longer. Micah deserved to know the truth, even if that truth would shatter his world as completely as mine had been shattered. The house felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. Every familiar object seemed to mock me with reminders of the life I'd thought was real, the life where being a good father meant everything would work out fine. I walked toward the kitchen, needing movement, needing some kind of action to counteract the weight of understanding that pressed down on my shoulders like lead. The kitchen welcomed me with familiar warmth, worn wooden counters that held decades of family meals, the old gas stove that still required a match to light, the coffee maker that gurgled to life every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. I needed the comfort of routine, the anchor of simple tasks that made sense when nothing else did. I pulled the coffee beans from the freezer and measured them into the grinder. The sharp were filled the silence, drowning out the video game sounds from upstairs for 30 blessed seconds. Water from the tap, filter in place, grounds measured with the precision of 20 years of morning ritual. The kitchen table drew my attention as the coffee began to brew. 4 chairs around scarred oak, each one holding memories. Micah's spot by the window where he did homework. My place at the head, back to the stove. Vera's chair across from me where she'd sat just 4 months ago, introducing the man who would destroy our family. Dad, I want you to meet Titus. He's really special to me. January 15th, a cold Sunday evening. I'd been cooking pot roast, filling the house with the smell of comfort food. When Vera had brought her new boyfriend home for the first time, Titus had walked into my kitchen wearing a black leather jacket despite the winter weather, motorcycle boots that left scuff marks on my clean floor, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Tattoos crawled up his neck in dark patterns that spoke of prison time and bad decisions. Nice place you've got here, Mr. Williamson. His voice carried a smoothness that immediately set me on edge. Great security system, quiet neighborhood, real comfortable setup you 3 have going. I'd shaken his offered hand, feeling calluses that came from physical work, noting the way his eyes cataloged every detail of my home, the expensive television in the living room, the family photos that showed 3 generations of stability, the signs of financial security that I'd never thought to hide. Vera had beamed with pride, hanging onto his arm like a teenager with her first crush. Titus has had some rough breaks, Dad, but he's really turned his life around, haven't you, honey? Absolutely. Beautiful. Past is past. I'm all about the future now. Throughout dinner, his questions had been casual, but pointed. How long had I worked at Ford? What kind of pension did auto workers get? Did I own the house outright? Was Vera listed on any of my accounts? I'd answered politely, while my instinct screamed warnings. Something fundamental was wrong with this man. The way he touched my daughter's shoulder possessively. The way he smiled when discussing my financial arrangements. The way he studied our home like he was calculating its worth. But Vera was happy, happier than I'd seen her since, before Paul's abuse started. She laughed at Titus's stories, defended his rough edges, explained away his crude comments as honesty rather than disrespect. After they'd left that night, I'd stood in this same spot by the coffee maker, washing dishes and trying to convince myself that my concerns were just overprotective fatherhood. Maybe Titus deserved a second chance. Maybe his criminal past, because it was obvious he had one, was truly behind him. The next morning, my neighbor Tom Rodriguez had stopped by with his usual Tuesday coffee visit. Interesting company you had last night, Tom had said, settling into the chair where Titus had sat. Recognized that motorcycle from the department database. Tom had been a police officer for 15 years, the kind of cop who knew every troublemaker in 3 counties. His weathered face carried the weight of too many domestic violence calls and robbery investigations. Ran his plates after he left. Guy named Titus Morrison. Record longer than my arm. Robbery, fraud, assault charges. Real piece of work. The coffee cup had frozen halfway to my lips. How bad? Bad enough. 3 convenience store robberies in Michigan. Credit card fraud scheme that built elderly folks out of their savings. Beat a man unconscious in a bar fight 2 years ago. Guy's a predator. Rufus targets vulnerable women, especially ones with resources. I'd set down my cup with trembling hands. What should I do? Keep that guy away from your family. Change any passwords he might have seen. Maybe move some money to accounts Vera doesn't know about. This isn't the kind of man who changes no matter what he's telling your daughter. But I hadn't done any of those things. Instead, I'd convinced myself that Tom was being overly suspicious, that Vera deserved happiness after Paul's abuse, that interfering in her relationship would push her away like I'd pushed away 2 previous boyfriends with my protective instincts. I'd watched, waited, hoped that my daughter's judgment would improve with time, hoped that Titus would prove my concerns wrong, hoped that love would be enough to keep our family safe. 3 months of hoping while Titus moved into our home, learned our routines, gained access to our information. 3 months of watching him charm Vera while my gut screamed that we were being hunted. The coffee maker beeped, pulling me back to the present. I poured a cup and sat down in my usual spot, staring at the empty chair where Titus had smiled and planned our destruction. I'd had all the information I needed, a police officer's warning, documented evidence of criminal behavior, my own instincts telling me this man was dangerous, and I'd done nothing. Fear had paralyzed me. Fear of losing Vera's love. Fear of being seen as controlling like Paul had been. Fear that standing up for my family would somehow make me the villain. Now we'd lost everything because I'd been too afraid of conflict to protect what mattered most. Upstairs, Micah's game sounds paused. Footsteps crossed the floor above my head. The bathroom break that meant homework time was approaching. In 15 minutes, my grandson would come downstairs expecting dinner and normally. Time was running out. The conversation I'd been dreading couldn't be postponed any longer. I rinsed my coffee cup in the sink, watching the last drops disappear down the drain. Everything was disappearing. Money, family. The illusion that being a good man was enough to keep the people you love safe. But Micah remained. My grandson, who trusted me to protect him, still needed to know the truth about what his mother had done. I walked back toward the living room, preparing myself for the hardest conversation of my life. The living room felt different as I entered it again, charged with the weight of approaching revelation. 5:45 on the wall clock. 15 minutes until Micah's usual homework time. 30 minutes until our normal dinner routine. Routine that would never be normal again. I paced between the couch and the coffee table, practicing words that wouldn't come. How do you explain betrayal to a child who still believes in the goodness of family? How do you shatter innocence without destroying hope? Son, your mother took our money and ran away. Too harsh. Too sudden. Micah, we need to talk about some changes. Too vague, too frightening in its uncertainty. Your mother has made some choices that affect our family. Still not right. Nothing felt right. Upstairs, the video game music continued its electronic melody. Some superhero adventure where good always triumphed over evil. Where justice prevailed and heroes saved the day. The irony cut deep. My grandson was playing at being a hero while the real villains had already escaped with their spoils. I settled onto the couch, then stood up again, sat in my armchair, then moved back to the couch. The house felt too small for the conversation we needed to have, yet too large for the emptiness that conversation would create. Through the ceiling, I could hear Micah's routine unfolding with predictable precision. the squeak of his desk chair as he pushed back from the computer, footsteps to the bathroom, the flush of the toilet, running water at the sink, the familiar sounds of a 5-year-old preparing to transition from play to work. My mind raced through different approaches. Should I ease into the topic with gentle questions about his mother? Start with reassurances about his security and future? Lead with the practical implications before revealing the emotional betrayal? The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking time that felt both too fast and too slow. Each minute brought us closer to the moment when Micah's world would change forever. Each second gave me more time to doubt every word I'd planned to say. At 5:50, his gaming chair creaked again, the pause of a save game in progress. Soon, he'd shut down the computer and gather his school books. The Tuesday routine we'd maintained for 3 years was about to begin for the last time. I moved to the bottom of the staircase, hand resting on the worn wooden banister. My grandfather had built these stairs in 1952, back when families stayed together through hardship, back when children could trust their parents to protect them rather than abandon them. "Grandpa, I'll be down in 5 minutes." Micah's voice carried the casual warmth of a child who believed his world was secure. A child who had no reason to doubt that Tuesday evening would unfold like every other Tuesday evening for the past 3 years. "Take your time, son." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The sounds of homework preparation began upstairs. Backpack zippers, textbook pages, the rustle of papers being organized. Micah was a good student, methodical, and responsible in ways that made me proud. He'd inherited his mother's intelligence, but somehow avoided her impulsiveness. At least I hoped he had. Standing at the base of the stairs, I realized how much I'd taken for granted. The simple pleasure of a grandson doing homework while dinner cooked on the stove, the comfortable routine of helping with algebra problems and listening to stories about school friends, the assumption that tomorrow would bring another normal evening in a life built on stability and trust, all of it was about to change. The wall clock showed 555. Time was a river flowing toward a waterfall, carrying us both toward a moment that couldn't be avoided or delayed. In my pocket, my phone remained silent. No missed calls from Vera. No text messages explaining herself. No last-minute change of heart. She was gone. Really, truly gone. And Micah needed to know. I cleared my throat and called up the stairs, my voice carrying more weight than usual. "Micah, can you come down here for a minute? We need to talk." "Sure, Grandpa. Just let me finish saving my homework file." The familiar sounds of a computer being shut down properly. Micah was careful with technology, never losing work to careless mistakes, another trait that made him different from his mother, who had always been impulsive and careless with important things. Footsteps crossed the floor above my head, moving toward the top of the stairs. In 30 seconds, maybe less, my grandson would appear at the top of those steps with his usual smile and casual question about dinner plans, and I would have to find the words to tell him that his mother had chosen a criminal over her own son's welfare, that the woman who was supposed to love him most in the world had abandoned him for money, and a fresh start with a man who saw children as obstacles to overcome. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I saw the toe of his sneaker on the first step, then another step down. My heart hammered against my ribs as I prepared to destroy the innocence of the boy I'd helped raise for 15 years. "Here we go. Time for the truth." Micah appeared at the bottom of the stairs with his usual easy stride, but something in his expression stopped my rehearsed words before they could form. No confusion, no casual curiosity about why his grandfather looked so serious, just calm, knowing eyes that held far too much understanding for a 5-year-old. He settled beside me on the couch without being asked, positioning himself close enough for comfort, but not so close as to crowd. The gesture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation rather than someone walking into one blindly. I reached for his hand, preparing to deliver the gentle blow I'd practiced. "Son, I need to tell you something important about your mother." "Grandpa, I already know." His voice carried no surprise, no shock, just quiet resignation mixed with something that looked suspiciously like protective determination. "She took all the money, and left with Titus. Right. The words hit me like cold water. My mouth opened, then closed. When did you find out? I heard them planning it Monday night. Micah shifted to face me directly, his young face serious beyond his ears. I was getting a glass of water around midnight when I heard voices in Mom's room. The door was cracked open, and they were talking about bank accounts and getting away clean. My mind reeled backward. 24 hours, Monday night. While I'd been sleeping peacefully in my bed, trusting that my family was safe under my roof, my daughter had been plotting my destruction just down the hallway. You've known since Monday. The timeline made my head spin. But you went to school yesterday morning, like nothing was wrong. You did homework? Ate dinner with me? I couldn't tell you then. Micah's voice gained strength, the tone of someone who'd thought through their reasoning carefully. I needed time to figure out how to fix it first, and I wanted you to have one more normal day before everything changed. He stood up suddenly and walked to his backpack by the front door. My grandson had been carrying this burden alone for 36 hours, protecting me from heartbreak, while I worried about protecting him from the same truth. But don't worry, Grandpa. Micah returned with a manila folder and several sheets of paper. I already handled it. Handled what exactly? He spread the papers on the coffee table between us with the methodical organization of someone presenting evidence. The first sheet was a printed photograph, grainy black and white from what looked like a school computer printer. A mugshot of Titus with wanted printed in bold letters across the top. Titus robbed Murphy's Corner store last Tuesday, April 1st. Micah pointed to the date on the wanted poster. I found this on the Columbus Police Department website. He's wanted for armed robbery, and there's a reward. I stared at the familiar face, looking back from the paper. The same man who'd sat at my kitchen table, asking questions about my pension and my security system. The same man my daughter had chosen over her family's safety. Where did you get this? Printed it during lunch at school yesterday. Mrs. Henderson lets us use the computer lab for research projects. Micah flipped to the next page. Handwritten notes in his careful teenager script. After I heard their plan Monday night, I couldn't sleep. So I researched everything I could find about Titus Morrison. The notes were thorough and organized. Dates of previous arrests, details from news articles about the Murphys' robbery, cross-references between different criminal cases. My 5-year-old grandson had conducted a more thorough background investigation than I'd ever attempted. And I know exactly where they went. Micah pointed to an address written at the bottom of his notes, 2847 Lane Avenue, Columbus, near OSU. I heard Mom mention it when they thought I was asleep. How do you remember the address so precisely? I wrote it down as soon as I heard it. Then I looked it up on Google Street View to make sure it was real. He reached into the folder and produced a printed map with the address circled in red ink. It's a crappy apartment complex about 2 miles from the university. The level of detail was staggering. Maps, criminal records, timeline analysis, even photographs of the apartment building he'd found online. Micah had approached this crisis with the systematic thoroughness of a detective, all while maintaining the facade of a normal teenager going about his daily routine. Son, this is incredible work, but why didn't you tell me any of this yesterday? We could have stopped them before they took the money. Micah's expression grew more serious. Because I knew you'd try to talk Mom out of leaving. You always try to fix things with her, even when she doesn't want them fixed. And if she'd stayed, she would have just found another way to take advantage of you later. The truth of that observation stung more than I wanted to admit. He was right. If I'd known about their plan in advance, I would have confronted Vera. Tried to reason with her. Probably offered her some of the money voluntarily just to keep the family together. But I did something better than stopping them. Micah's voice carried a note of pride that made him sound older than his years. I called the police tip hotline this morning before school. Told them exactly where to find a wanted fugitive. Gave them the address. Described their car. Everything. He handed me the final piece of paper, a confirmation number written in his handwriting along with the time of the call. 9:45 a.m. Tuesday, April 8th. Anonymous tip regarding Titus Morrison, wanted for armed robbery. I sat back against the couch cushions, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what my grandson had accomplished. While I'd been stumbling through my day in shock and confusion, he'd been executing a plan that could bring both justice and recovery to our family crisis. Micah, you're braver and smarter than anyone your age should have to be. I learned from watching you, Grandpa. His voice carried no boasting, just simple truth. You taught me that when someone threatens your family, you protect them. That's all I was doing. But he protected me better than I'd ever managed to protect him. While I had enabled his mother's selfish choices for years, my 5-year-old grandson had seen the situation clearly and acted with decisive intelligence. Why didn't you tell me earlier today, though, when I came home from the bank, so upset? Micah's expression grew gentler. I could see you were hurting enough already, and I wasn't sure the police would act quickly. I didn't want to get your hopes up if nothing came of the tip. He'd been shielding me from disappointment. Even as he worked to solve the crisis, I couldn't handle myself. The role reversal was complete. My grandson had become the protector, and I had become the one who needed protection. The sound of my phone ringing cut through the moment, sharp and unexpected in the quiet room. I glanced at the phone, then back at Micah's expectant face. We should probably answer that. Not yet. Micah's hand touched my arm gently. Let me explain the rest first. I set the phone aside, letting it ring through to voicemail. My grandson had earned the right to finish his story without interruption. You asked why I didn't tell you earlier. Micah organized his papers into a neat stack, buying time to find the right words. The truth is, I've been watching Mom take advantage of you for years. And I was tired of seeing you get hurt. He leaned back against the couch, suddenly looking very young despite his mature actions. Remember last Christmas when she promised to help pay for groceries, but then spent her whole paycheck on that purse, and you just smiled and said it was fine. We'd make do, I remembered. Vera had been so excited about the designer bag she'd found on sale, justifying the expense by claiming she needed something professional for job interviews. Interviews that never materialized for jobs she never seriously pursued, or when she borrowed $300 for Micah's school clothes. But then I saw her wearing new boots that cost twice that much. Micah's voice carried the patient tone of someone who'd been making careful observations for a long time. You never asked for the money back, never made her explain where her priorities were. The pattern he described was accurate and painful. Every time Vera had asked for help, I provided it without question, without accountability, without any expectation that she contribute to the household that supported her. I love Mom, Grandpa, but I love you more. The simple declaration hit me harder than any of his careful research or strategic planning. You're the one who makes sure I eat breakfast every day. You're the one who helps with my homework and comes to my chess tournaments and remembers when I have tests. He was right. While Vera lived in our house, I'd been the one providing the daily care, emotional support, and practical guidance that Micah needed. His mother had been more like an additional dependent than a partner in raising him. When I heard them planning to steal your money, I realized this was my chance to protect you for once, instead of always being the one getting protected. Micah's voice grew stronger, more confident. You've spent 15 years taking care of me. It was time for me to take care of you. The role reversal still felt disorienting, but I couldn't deny the competence he demonstrated. While I'd been paralyzed by shock and betrayal, my grandson had researched the situation, identified solutions, and taken decisive action. I couldn't let them hurt you anymore. Micah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. You're all I have that really matters. I reached over and pulled him into a fierce hug. This boy, who'd become more adult than his adult mother. His arms wrapped around me with surprising strength. And for a moment, we were just grandfather and grandson, holding on to each other in the wreckage of our broken family. We're going to be fine, you know, I said against the top of his head. Just you and me. We make a pretty good team. Better than we ever were with Mom around. His voice was muffled against my shoulder, but I could hear the relief in it. I was always worried she'd do something like this eventually. At least now we know where we stand. When we separated, both of us had tears in our eyes, but they felt more like tears of relief than sorrow. The crisis had stripped away illusions, but it had also revealed the strength of what remained. "So, what happens next?" Micah asked, settling back beside me on the couch. "If the police arrest them, do we get the money back?" "I don't know the legal process," I admitted. "But even if we don't recover a penny, we'll figure out how to manage. I've got my pension, and you've got a good head on your shoulders. Between the two of us, we can handle whatever comes next." Micah nodded, but I could see the practical concern in his eyes. 5-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about household finances. But this particular 5-year-old had earned the right to honest conversations about our situation. "Are we going to have enough money?" he asked quietly. "For groceries and utilities and everything." The question was practical and immediate, the kind of concern that kept teenagers awake at night when they shouldn't have to think about such things. But it also revealed how much he understood about our new reality. I started to answer, then stopped as a memory surfaced. Something I'd forgotten in all the crisis and revelation of the past few hours. Something that could ease at least some of his worry about our immediate future. "You know what, Micah?" I stood up from the couch, energy returning to my tired body. "I just remembered something upstairs." His curious eyes followed my movement. "What kind of something, Grandpa?" I smiled for the first time since discovering the empty bank account. "The kind of something your mother never knew existed." "Wait here a minute," I told Mike as I headed for the stairs. "I need to check on something in my bedroom. Should I come with you?" He started to rise from the couch. "Actually, yes. You should see this." Climbing the stairs felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the long day of emotional weight. Micah followed close behind, his curiosity evident in the way he took the steps 2 at a time to keep pace with my sudden urgency. My bedroom occupied the back corner of the second floor, modestly furnished with the kind of practical pieces that had served me well for 23 years in this house. The double bed with its worn oak frame, the dresser topped with family photographs and everyday necessities, the nightstand that held my reading glasses, and the small digital clock that woke me at 6 a.m. every morning. "What are we looking for?" Micah asked as I knelt beside the bed. "In policy." I reached under the bed frame, feeling for the metal storage box I'd placed there 2 years ago. Not the kind you buy from a company, the kind you create yourself. The box slid out easily, heavier than its size suggested. Plain gray metal with a simple latch, the kind of fireproof storage container sold at office supply stores for protecting important documents. I'd bought it specifically for this purpose, though I'd hoped never to need what it contained. I carried the box to the bed and set it down on the faded blue comforter. Micah watched with growing anticipation as I reached behind the framed photo of his grandmother on my nightstand and retrieved a small key. "Your mother walked past this room every day for 3 years, I explained, inserting the key into the box's lock. "She never once asked what was in here or why I kept it locked." The lid opened to reveal neat stacks of bills, mostly 20 seconds and 50 seconds, with a few hundreds mixed in. Money organized by denomination and held together with rubber bands, the result of 2 years of careful small-scale saving. Micah's eyes widened. "How much is in there?" "Let's count and see." I lifted out the first stack and began separating the bills. $20 bills, 40, 60, 80, 100. The familiar ritual of counting money felt different when it represented security rather than loss. Stack by stack, we organized the cash on the bed. Some bills were crisp and new, others worn from circulation, but all of them represented small monthly deposits I'd made from my pension without Vera's knowledge. 1,220 seconds, I announced, moving to the next stack. 850 seconds and 1,200 inches hundreds. I counted the final stack twice to be sure. Total $3,200. Micah stared at the money spread across the bed as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. "You've been hiding this the whole time." "Not hiding, protecting." I began reorganizing the bills back into their original stacks. My grandfather lived through the Great Depression. He taught me never to keep all your eggs in one basket. Always have something set aside that nobody else knows about. The old man's wisdom had seemed outdated in the modern world of banks and direct deposits, but it had just proven itself invaluable. While Vera had cleaned out every account she knew about, she'd never discovered the emergency fund that would keep us afloat. Why didn't Mom know about it? Because somewhere in my gut, I knew this day might come. I love your mother, but I've watched her make selfish choices for years. Some part of me recognized that her access to my resources needed limits. Micah helped me return the money to the storage box. His movements careful and respectful. So, we're actually okay, like really okay, for several months at least. I locked the box and returned the key to its hiding place. Long enough to figure out our next steps. Make some decisions about the future. Maybe even recover some of what was stolen if the police are successful. The relief on my grandson's face was worth more than all the money in the box. For the first time since this morning, he looked like a 5-year-old again, instead of a teenager forced to carry adult burdens. Can we go back downstairs now? Micah asked. I want to finish setting up the chess game we never got to play. Chess, the normal evening activity we'd maintained for 3 years. The comfortable routine that represented stability and connection. The idea sounded perfect after a day of crisis and revelation. Absolutely. I lifted the storage box. Let me put this back where it belongs, and then we'll see if you've improved your endgame strategy since last week. Walking down the stairs together, money box in hand, felt like descending from crisis into recovery. The house still contained the same furniture, the same photographs, the same memories of family life that had included Vera. But now it felt like a home for 2 instead of 3, and somehow that felt more honest than what we'd had before. In the living room, Micah was already pulling the wooden chess set from its cabinet, arranging pieces on the coffee table with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. The familiar ritual of setting up pawns and positioning major pieces provided exactly the kind of normal activity we both needed. I placed the storage box on the mantelpiece next to the family photographs, a tangible reminder that security and planning could coexist with love and generosity. Then, I settled into my usual chair, across from Micah's position on the couch. Your move, Grandpa. But before I could touch a piece, the phone rang again, its sharp tone cutting through our moment of peaceful normalcy. The chess pieces sat abandoned between us as I stared at the ringing telephone. 8:30 inches. The evening was late for casual calls in our quiet neighborhood. The mechanical ring of the old rotary phone seemed louder than usual, more insistent, cutting through the comfortable silence we'd finally achieved. Micah looked up from the chessboard, his eyes meeting mine with shared understanding. We both knew who was calling. I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the side table where the black phone demanded attention. The receiver felt heavy in my hand as I lifted it to my ear, preparing for the storm I knew was coming. Hello, Dad. How could you betray me like this? Vera's voice exploded through the earpiece so loudly that Micah could hear every word from across the room. Titus is arrested. The police took everything. How could you do this to me? I held the phone slightly away from my ear, gesturing for Micah to stay quiet and still. My grandson needed to hear this conversation. Needed to understand the consequences of his brave action, but he also needed protection from his mother's rage. Where are you, Vera? Are you safe? Safe? I'm broke and alone because of you? Her voice cracked with fury and desperation. The police knew exactly where to find us. They had our address, knew about the money, everything. You called them, didn't you? Don't lie to me. The moment had arrived. I could expose Micah's involvement, shift the blame to a 5-year-old boy who'd acted out of love and protection, or I could shield my grandson from his mother's wrath by accepting responsibility for doing what needed to be done. Yes, the word came out steady and clear. I called them. Silence stretched across the line for several seconds. Then Vera's voice returned lower, but somehow more dangerous. I can't believe you would turn your own daughter into the police. You stole my life savings and ran away with a criminal. I kept my voice calm, factual. That money was all I had. Vera, you took everything I'd worked 42 years to save. It was just sitting there in those accounts. You weren't using it. It was my retirement fund, my security, my backup plan for medical emergencies and unexpected expenses. Each word felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of our relationship. You had no right to take it. I'm your daughter. I deserved better than living in that tiny town, working dead-end jobs, never getting anywhere. The self-pity in her voice was as familiar as it was infuriating. Titus could have given me a real life. We could have started over somewhere new with stolen money and a man wanted for armed robbery. He was trying to change. People can change, Dad. I looked across the room at Micah, who was listening to every word with the focused attention of someone learning hard lessons about family loyalty and personal responsibility. My grandson had risked everything to protect me from this woman's selfishness, and now she was demanding sympathy for the consequences of her own choices. The money is gone. Vera confiscated it as evidence. Titus is in jail, and you're exactly where your choices have led you. This is all your fault. Her voice rose to a shriek. I'm homeless and penniless because you couldn't just let me be happy. I couldn't let you destroy our family. The words came from deep in my chest, from a place of pain I'd been carrying for months. You abandoned your son, stole from your father, and ran away with a criminal. Those were your choices, not mine. Through the phone, I could hear traffic noise in the background. Vera was calling from a payphone or someone else's cell, somewhere public, probably with nowhere to go and no money for basic necessities. The reality of her situation was finally catching up with her. But she was still blaming everyone except herself. You've ruined everything, she screamed. This was my chance at real happiness, and you destroyed it. I held the phone away from my ear as her voice reached a painful volume. Micah had moved closer, standing just behind my chair, offering silent support. My grandson's presence gave me strength to say what needed to be said. I protected my family, I said quietly. From you. The line went silent, except for the sound of Vera's ragged breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and deadly calm. This isn't over. What do you mean, this isn't over? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. I mean, you haven't heard the last from me. Vera's voice had shifted from screaming rage to something more controlled and calculating. I'm stranded here because of what you did. I need money to get back on my feet. The money you stole is gone, confiscated by police. I can't help you with that. You have other money, your pension, your savings account, that I couldn't access. Send me something, anything. I'm your daughter. The plea carried the familiar tone of manipulation she'd perfected over the years. The same voice that had convinced me to pay her rent, her lawyer fees, her credit card bills, the voice that had trained me to say yes without question, to enable without accountability. But not tonight, not after everything that had happened. No, the single word hung in the air between us like a door slamming shut. What do you mean, no? Disbelief crept into her voice. I'm homeless. I have nowhere to go, no way to buy food or find shelter. Then you should have thought about that before you stole from your family and ran away with a criminal. I surprised myself with how steady my voice remained. Those are the consequences of your choices. Vera, you can't just abandon me. I'm your child, and Micah is your child. I looked at my grandson, who was watching me with pride and amazement. The child you abandoned without a second thought. The boy you were willing to drag into a life of crime and uncertainty because you want a fresh start with a man who beats people unconscious in bar fights. Silence, then that's different. Micah is 15. He can take care of himself. He's a child who needs stability, security, and adults who put his welfare above their own selfish desires. The words came from months of suppressed frustration and disappointment. Everything you've proven you can't provide. I could have provided plenty if you hadn't interfered. Titus had plans. Titus is a career criminal who robbed a convenience store a week before you stole my money. His plans involved using stolen funds to finance a life built on more crime. I felt Micah's hand touch my shoulder, a gesture of support that gave me courage to continue. I won't enable that kind of life for you or anyone else. Fine, then I'll figure it out myself. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you change your mind. I hope you do figure it out, Vera. I hope you find a way to build a legitimate life, make amends for what you've done, and maybe someday earn back the trust you've destroyed. My voice caught slightly on the words, but I won't send you money to make bad choices easier. You're choosing money over your daughter. I'm choosing my grandson's welfare over your immediate wants. I'm choosing responsibility over enablement. I'm choosing to break a pattern that has hurt all of us, including you. The breathing on the other end of the line became more labored. Vera was crying now, but the tears sounded angry rather than remorseful. If that's how you want it, then fine. Don't expect to ever see me again. Don't expect phone calls or letters or visits. Don't expect to meet any grandchildren I might have in the future. You've made your choice, and I'm making mine. The ultimatum was designed to wound, to make me reconsider my position out of fear of permanent loss. But sitting in my living room with Micah beside me, surrounded by evidence of the stable, peaceful life we'd begun building together, the threat felt more like a promise than a punishment. If that's what you decide, Vera, I'll be sad, but I'll understand. The door will always be open if you want to return under different circumstances. If you're ready to be accountable, to make amends, to contribute instead of just taking. You mean if I'm ready to crawl back on my hands and knees and beg forgiveness for trying to build a better life? I mean, if you're ready to acknowledge that stealing from your family and abandoning your son were wrong choices that hurt people who loved you, if you're ready to earn trust instead of demanding it, well, I'm not ready for that. And I never will be. Her voice had gone cold and final. The daughter I'd raised, taught to ride a bicycle, walked down the aisle, and rescued from an abusive marriage, was about to cut herself out of our lives permanently rather than accept responsibility for her actions. I love you, Vera. I always will. Save it for someone who cares. The phone line went dead with the harsh sound of a receiver being slammed down. I stood holding the silent phone for a long moment, processing the finality of what had just happened. 38 years of being Vera's father had just ended with a dial tone. Micah's arms wrapped around me from behind, a 15-year-old boy, offering comfort to his grandfather in the aftermath of losing a daughter. I set the phone back in its cradle and turned to embrace him properly. Both of us, understanding that our family configuration had just become permanent, we held each other in the quiet living room, surrounded by chess pieces and family photographs, and the accumulated comfort of a home that had weathered its worst storm and emerged stronger than before. 2 months passed like pages turning in a book of ordinary days. Spring gave way to early summer, and the crisis of April faded into a distant memory that rarely intruded on our settled routine. Micah finished his sophomore year with grades that would have made any parent proud. His best semester since middle school, accomplished without the constant stress of his mother's financial demands and emotional chaos. I discovered the pleasure of full-time grandfathering, cooking breakfast every morning, helping with homework every evening, attending school events without worrying about whether Verna would show up and cause some kind of scene. We developed our own rhythm, grocery shopping on Tuesdays, chess lessons on Thursday evenings, weekend projects around the house that Micah approached with the enthusiasm of someone finally secure in his living situation. The $3,000 I'd hidden proved sufficient for our careful lifestyle. My pension covered basic expenses, and Micah contributed by taking on a summer job mowing lawns in the neighborhood. He'd grown taller in those 2 months, more confident, carrying himself like a young man who understood his place in the world and the value of his contributions. We rarely spoke of Vera. Her absence became as natural as her presence had once been disruptive. The house felt larger without her constant crisis, more peaceful without the underlying tension of wondering when the next emergency would drain our resources or emotional reserves. On Thursday afternoon, June 6th, I was reading the Riverside Herald in my usual chair while Micah worked on his summer reading assignment at the kitchen table. The windows were open to let in the warm air and the sound of birds in the maple tree outside. Our domestic tranquility had become so routine that I'd almost forgotten how precious it was. The loud knocking on the front door shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a rock through glass. Both Micah and I looked up in surprise. We rarely had unexpected visitors, and most of our neighbors knew to call ahead. The knocking came again, more insistent, as if whoever stood on our porch was determined not to be ignored. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:00 inches the afternoon. Too early for dinner visitors, too late for morning deliveries. Who could that be? I asked, more to myself than to Micah. Maybe it's the mailman, Micah suggested, though we both knew the mail had already been delivered. I rose from my chair and walked to the front window, angling myself to see the porch without being observed. What I saw made me freeze in place, my hand gripping the curtain edge. Vera stood on our front step, thinner than she'd been in April, wearing clothes that looked like they'd seen better days. A single small duffel bag sat at her feet. Everything she owned apparently contained in one compact package. My daughter had returned. Grandpa. Micah appeared beside me, concerned in his voice. What is it? I stepped back from the window, my mind racing through possibilities and complications. 2 months of peace, 2 months of stability, 2 months of building a life that worked for both of us. And now, this. The knocking came again, followed by a voice I recognized but wished I didn't have to hear. Dad, I know you're in there. Please open the door. Micah's eyes widened as he recognized his mother's voice. His body shifted slightly, moving closer to me in an unconscious gesture of alliance and protection. We'd become a team over these past 2 months, and his instincts told him to stand with me rather than rush to greet the woman who'd abandoned him. I walked slowly to the front door, my hand resting on the deadbolt I'd installed the week after her phone call. Such a small thing, but it represented the boundary I'd finally learned to establish. The choice to let people into our life, rather than simply allowing them to take what they wanted. My fingers hesitated it on the lock. 2 months ago, I would have opened this door immediately, would have welcomed her back with relief and questions, and probably money for whatever crisis had driven her home. But that man had been trained by decades of enabling and fear of loss. The man standing at this door had learned something different. He'd learned that love sometimes required saying no, that protecting the people who mattered most might mean disappointing the people who demanded the most. That family could be redefined by choice and commitment rather than biology and obligation. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door. Vera stood before me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She looked older, worn down by whatever experiences had filled her 2 months away from home, but her eyes still held the same mixture of defiance and entitlement that had driven her to steal my life savings and abandon her son. Hello, Dad. Behind me, I felt, rather than saw Micah move closer, ready to support whatever decision I made about the woman who'd given birth to him, but failed to be his mother when it mattered most. Hello, Vera. She glanced past me to acknowledge her son, the boy she'd left behind without a second thought when her dreams of easy money and criminal romance called to her. Hi, Micah. My grandson said nothing, but I felt his presence like an anchor, reminding me of what we'd built together and what we stood to lose if I made the same mistakes that had brought us to crisis in the first place. Vera looked at both of us, waiting for an invitation that didn't come automatically this time. The door remained half-closed, my body blocking easy entry, my choice still unmade about whether our hard-won peace was worth risking for the possibility of redemption. Can I come in? If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.